Welcome to our channel. This is the first episode of Karen Wong interviewing interesting people. I first got interested in doing this because I'd been watching Jordan Peterson and learning some interesting things from him and seeing how it overlaps with my understanding of the world through art. And that got me to thinking there must be other fundamental overlaps in every domain of knowledge. And ever since then, I've been poking around that theory, and it has led me to some interesting places. And one of those interesting places is Alex Booth from Illinois. Hi, Alex.
Hello, Karen.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Like you said, I'm from Illinois, but the southern part of the state. So sort of in a rural area in Illinois.
What part of Illinois?
A small town
Down in the southern part. Well, the only reason I ask, you don't need to give me the name of the town. The only reason I ask is I used to live in Iowa. And so, like Keokuk, Iowa, some of those areas down in the southern part of the state are pretty close to southern Illinois, or at least central Illinois. So I'd go back and forth.
There,
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
anyway, I know that area, the Midwest. So
sure, yeah. So Midwesterner, I guess you could say. And I work as a geologist and a geophysicist, and I do exploratory work in that, looking for natural resources. And that's what I do for a living. And some of my interests are what have brought us to talk today. And those would be things like some of the things that I heard you talking about with Paul Vanderklay recently.
Yeah, Paul is very inspiring to me. In fact, I got inspired to do this through watching his videos. So
absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm not as familiar with him as I'd like to be. I've just sort of discovered him recently. I am familiar with Jordan Peterson and have resonated with a lot of what he has to say. And I'm sort of an observer of this phenomenon that's happening with the controversy in the culture right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that I really choose sides in that. I try to be an observer. But what really interests me about, say, what Jordan Peterson has to say and what you've had to say is the concepts that revolve around the emergence of meaning out of chaos.
Yeah, I was writing some stuff on that today. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's just something that I've thought about for a long time myself and have written about, but really haven't constructed my ideas to the point where I feel like they're worth sharing particularly. But I guess why I reached out to you for a conversation is because I feel like it's important that these things are talked about and they are allowed to, there's information exchanged. And I think that the exchange of that information sort of is the point. Mm-hmm. So that new things or novelty will emerge from talking about these concepts and maybe using language that didn't exist 50 years ago or 100 years ago, incorporating physics, information theory, AI, and philosophy. So
I've been thinking a lot about this whole thing, the phenomenon of Jordan Peterson. And to me, what's really cool is this idea that basically he got out there and started talking about these things, and the result has been sort of to crowdsource the problem. Because now even people that aren't paying any attention to Jordan Peterson anymore are talking to each other and are starting these kind of small groups of people going off after different rabbit trails of ideas and seeing how these things all fit together.
Sure. Yeah, it's been really a phenomenon and I think that's a really good thing for sure.
So your particular interest falls into this area of meaning emerging from chaos. Is that And what was there something that I said on the interview with Paul Vanderklay that particularly triggered that interest, or?
Yes, I think it's when you're talking about your artistic process.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. I do something similarly. With you could call it more on the scale of doodling, or
Oh, okay.
I don't really consider myself to be um, an artist in the commonly accepted use of that word. But
Well, I think the commonly accepted use of the word is wrong.
well, there you go. Yeah.
So I'd love to
Well,
see some of your doodling. I wish I was better at doodling, because it
oh, yeah.
really good doodling requires, I'm not sure how to put it exactly, but I can be too intentional when I'm drawing,
Oh,
and
yeah.
my left brain gets too involved. So what I will often do is turn something on, some physics lecture or something, and listen to that while I'm working, because
Okay, yeah.
that disengages my left brain, so my right brain can kind of just do its thing. And that's sort of what doodling is, right? You're busy
Yes.
at a business meeting or something, your left brain is completely engaged, and then the right brain can just go on and do its thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something in particular about that process that I think is beneficial,
Mm-hmm.
and needs and should be studied more, and understood. And
Well, there's a big overlap there with the whole theory of information entropy.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so I think one of the values of um, allowing yourself the time and the space to sort of sit down and focus your attention and get into a frame of mind where it's a very allowing frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said in your talk with Paul, that you sort of make chaos on the canvas, and
Mm-hmm.
then you look for points of focus or nucleation, of meaning there to work with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that as well. But I do it sort of specifically for the process, as opposed to for the end result. And I found that to be a really sort of centering and balancing
Mm-hmm.
practice to
Mm-hmm.
do. And I think that maybe one of the reasons that it is so balancing and centering is because it's sort of a biofeedback system where
Uh-huh.
you're doing something and you're also observing it, and the observation of that is feeding back into what you're doing. So there's becomes this flow. Of course, that
Mm-hmm.
the word flow state is very
Right.
really commonly used
Yeah.
nowadays, but it's this flow of information, or flow of experience, from what you see to then what you're doing. But the interesting part is that by working with chaos like that, or with randomness, there's different ways different things you can call that, but
Mm-hmm.
um, without any expectation,
Mm-hmm.
and allowing meaning to emerge, or allowing, at first maybe the gestalt sort of aspects of vision and meaning making, like you might see an alignment of things that looks like a line, or a form of some kind, with no label. There's no labeling associated with it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that looks like a dog or a horse or a house. And if you can sort of maintain that,
That's the challenge, isn't it? To
yeah,
maintain
yeah,
that neutrality and not
yes,
make it into something.
it is, and it takes patience.
Yeah.
And so that is, something that sort of is in low supply nowadays.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
yeah, there's an aspect of slowing down, allowing, removing the meaning making or the labeling aspect of your awareness, and just in doing that, order will emerge. It does emerge. It's like you can't hardly stop it, as you say, from emerging. And when you can approach it from that place of you are aware of order emerging, it's a very non-egoic state. So you're not the one doing it. In essence, there's something that is emerging that isn't you intentionally trying to get it to emerge.
Yeah, so that's the thing that I've been really fascinated. In fact, I've been obsessed, I would say, in the last 3 or 4 months with this idea of anomaly. And the idea of anomaly, well, have you read Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning?
I have not.
Okay, it's a book that he wrote and published in 1999 when he was still a professor at university. So it's very professorial. It's not written for public consumption. It's very long and wordy and complicated. And the only way I was able to understand it at all was that it maps so perfectly with what I understand about art and the elements and principles of design and the world that is created out of those elements and principles of design maps over onto this world of archetypes that Jordan Peterson is laying out in that book. And so I'm reading Maps of Meaning, and chapter 4 is anomaly. And the whole, there's like, I don't know, 100 pages on anomaly and what he is calling anomaly. So it's a hugely complicated idea, but what I got from it was somewhat like you're talking about with art, when things begin to emerge out of the chaos, or on a very practical level. Let's say I'm an autonomous car and I'm going down the freeway, and it's a 2-lane freeway and it's clear all the way, and there might be cars in front of me and behind me, but I know what is expected. I know exactly where I'm going. Google has mapped my route before. I know exactly what's happening. And then something veers out of the side lane and a bicycle falls over in front of my car. That's an anomaly.
Yes.
Or everything is going well. I'm on my way to work and I get a flat tire, or my child gets sick, or any number of things can be an anomaly. But it's those things that poke their way into our orderly world that we have to try to make some sense out of. And it's in the sense making that we gain information, knowledge, wisdom. So I started looking at this from the standpoint of information entropy. When you have maximum chaos, you have the maximum potential for information.
Right.
But it's not accessible information to you because of the chaos. And so there has to be some way for that information to transfer, which comes out of making order out of the chaos. And now that information has transferred over into your capacity, your increased capacity for maturity or for growth in understanding. Like you were talking earlier about how we might have new language now to talk about things because of the growth in quantum physics and computing, and that kind of language now gives us a new way of looking at the world that we didn't have before. So now when chaos occurs, we have a new way of understanding the chaos that can also be brought over into the order and renew our world. So it's that kind of thing that I've been trying to run down.
Yeah. What you're talking about makes me think of, and there's a reason we're talking, because we're thinking about a lot of the same things, and the sort of the rabbit trails that I've gone down have led me to this idea of stochastic resonance.
Okay, that's a word I looked up the other day.
Okay, yeah, see, there's
Yeah.
synchronicity here.
Only I looked it up because this is so weird. I was laying in bed remembering a Bible study I had been in a number of years ago where my Bible teacher was teaching me a certain way of looking at the scripture.
Okay.
And there is a way of looking, especially at the old Hebrew. Well, I think it's also in the Greek scriptures. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but it's actually, I couldn't remember the word. I later remembered it. It's chiastic.
Oh, yeah.
Because I couldn't remember the word chiastic, the word that came into my mind was stochastic. So I looked it up. And really, there's a little bit of overlap. But
okay.
A chiasm is in the scripture, if you really study in depth, you'll see that there is this pattern that goes like this and then goes back out again.
Okay.
Where there'll be a verse, maybe especially in the Psalms where it's a poem, there'll be a verse where there's a verse that talks about a certain thing. That verse will be repeated maybe 20 verses later at the bottom. We'll call that A and A prime. Okay. And then there'll be a B and B prime, and then a C and C prime. And then you'll see a verse right in the middle that is not repeated. And that one in the middle is the important one. So you get this whole structure to understand what is the focus. It's almost like building a little jewel case for the important idea. And that's a chiasm.
Fascinating.
But there's also, and I've seen, and the reason I got to thinking about it was that I had just run into an old Bible study that I wrote years ago on the story of Joseph and his family. And I had written that Bible study from the standpoint of, when you look at that story, there's all these concentric circles that go in and in and in and in until Joseph is at the maximum point of suffering. And then from there, his life enlarges again and again and again until it not only enlarges him and his family and the nation state, but also all of the Hebrew people and then out into eternity. So it's this, even over the course of many, many, many pages in scripture, there's this chiastic structure. And I was trying to remember what the name of that structure was because I ran into a mathematical structure that looks very similar to it. And now I can't remember what the mathematical structure was, but anyway, that's how my brain thinks.
Yeah.
So I ran into stochasm. So I want to know what stochastic resonance means. Now you're going to tell me.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, I have to say something about what you just said though. So,
sure.
When you're talking about things expanding and contracting and expanding again, or being diverted or separated and coming together and going back away again.
Yes.
That reminds me very much of sort of like a heartbeat or a pulsation that is represented, like so many things in nature, as a waveform. Is it like a sine wave? There's an up and then there's a down, and there's an up and a down. And there's so many different ways or containers that you can take and look at information, sort of lenses that you can look at it through. But stochastic is, I think, looked through best through the lens of the waveform, that like frequency, amplitude, phase type of a lens.
So there really is a connection between a chiasm and a stochastic resonance then. That's mind-blowing.
Well, I mean, I think that's the way you and I think. And there's this, like a procedural aspect to the way we think about things, from what I gather. And there's a contextual aspect. So, we're looking and seeing context and connection between things that, maybe a lot of people don't see, obviously, because they're not looking. for
Mm-hmm.
the connection. And I sense that from you, that you're seeing, always seeing connections, and you're seeing sort of a chain of connections, and
Right.
how one thing proceeds to another.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And
I
so
can't turn it off.
yeah,
Yeah.
me neither. So but stochastic, it refers to a and like a lot of things, there's different ways that's been defined and looked at, but maybe one of the most interesting aspects of it is a practical application. So stochastic is a the a phenomenon, really, when you have a signal, right? So there's information in a waveform, a radio wave, a brain wave, whatever wave you want to
Mm-hmm.
think of that contains or carries information. But it's that information, or that signal, is what it's referred to, is below the threshold of awareness, or it's below the threshold of detection. So it's too quiet, like the amplitude is too low.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at that as the radio is turned down too low, or you can also look at it as the subconscious mind.
Oh, okay.
Or there's information there, but we're not aware of it. It's not within our awareness. It's too subtle. So it's below that certain threshold of detection by our conscious awareness, or whatever detector there is. And
Mm-hmm.
a very practical, really neat thing that is an application here is so you have a subtle waveform containing signal. When you introduce noise or chaos to that signal, there's in particular white noise, which contains a whole different spectrum of different frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those random frequencies will interact with the signal and combine and boost the amplitude. So that's another name for that, is resonance. When you have similar amplitudes interact, they add together and the amplitude goes up. And so by interacting with a signal interacting with chaos will boost a certain aspect of that of the signal, and bring it up to a level where it comes into awareness. So
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
yeah, that's cool, right?
Yeah, that's really cool. Can you hold that thought for just a
Yeah.
second? Because I want to hear the rest of that, but I want to tell you two things that what you were saying brought up for me.
Okay.
One was on the issue of okay, you were talking about the amplitude being just under what you can understand, what the conscious mind can understand,
Detect.
can detect. Okay,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
so two things about that. One is I've been thinking about this idea of meaning,
mm-hmm,
and how a word only has as much meaning as the receiver can understand.
mm-hmm.
So a word to a child is an entirely different thing than that same word is to an adult. Um, and obviously this holds true for concepts and characters in movies and everything else. You see a movie and one person will interpret the character at a very shallow level because they've never experienced much of life, but someone else who's gone through immense suffering will interpret that character with a depth of meaning that may not have even been intended by the original author of the story. And art is the same way, so our
Yes.
detector is subject to how much input we have experienced. And so we're unable to detect some things that are actually there, but because we don't have the experience and our framework capacity hasn't been built out, we can't detect it. So that's one thing that came up for me when you were talking. And the other
Yes.
thing is, I read this quote this morning from I don't know if I can find it or not, but it was from, I hate when this happens. It was from Michelangelo.
Oh,
And Michelangelo said, not even the best of artists has any conception that a single marble block does not contain within its excess, and that is only attained by the hand that obeys the intellect. Now, Michelangelo used to say every sculpture he ever did was already there inside the rock, and his only job was to remove the excess.
yes.
And so somehow, and I had written that quote down, I had also written down a quote from Nassim Taleb. Are you familiar with him? He wrote the book about fragile and anti-fragile.
I'm familiar with that book title, but I have not read.
He talks about the wisdom and effectiveness of subtraction over addition.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the wisdom of acts of omission over acts of commission.
Mm-hmm.
Now that really resonates for me because of the way I do my art.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I start with a blank canvas, then every decision that I make has to come from my intentionality, and there's no space for my subconscious creative mind. But if I start from either from an old failed painting that I turn upside down and try to find something in it, or if I start from creating chaos on the canvas, then I'm removing the things that don't fit and leaving the things that fit, which is the same thing you were talking about with your doodling, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so there's something in this idea of excess,
Mm-hmm.
excess capacity, excess information that is not available to us because we don't have enough capacity internally. And the idea of stochastic resonance, that the amplitude isn't high enough, but the information is there. We just can't access it because we haven't met yet the chaos that will allow us to increase the amplitude and capture the message.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
All I'm saying is the information is there. The information that's necessary to understand the message is there in the sound wave, but we can't hear it because it's below the threshold.
Yes.
Right? But
yes.
The information is still there. It can be accessed, and so that's the way I see like all the knowledge in the universe. There's enough knowledge in the universe for the most sophisticated intellect to be kept busy for the rest of his life and millions of progeny as well. But it's also information that is accessible and fun and beautiful even for a child and even for a developmentally disabled adult. So there is this beautiful simplicity and also this beautiful complexity.
Yes.
And we have the full range of experience open to us based on how many anomalies we have come up against in life and how much information we have transferred from that piece of chaos over into our lives. I don't know. Sorry.
No. I mean, what you're saying is resonating with something that you were talking with Paul Vanderklay about, and sort of the way you diverge a bit from Jordan Peterson's idea of the hierarchy.
Oh yeah.
And that really resonated with me, speaking about the strings and how in the artistic community there's this string of experience or string of skill, string of or you can call it a spectrum or whatever, but it's more like a journey, a string that's a journey across that string. And there's people that are at different levels and different by different standards of measurement. They're at different places on that string, and it isn't a hierarchy in the sense that someone's better than someone else in terms of their value as a human being, but there's people that have more and less experience, more and less natural skill or talent, or natural talent, or have developed their skills in different areas.
Yes.
And And so I think that the destination, or that, or the top of the ladder, so to speak, is not to get to the other end of the string. It's to fully embody the joy and appreciation, love and gratitude, and all
Oh,
those good
that's really good.
things
That's really good.
wherever you are on that string.
Yeah, yeah, yep. I was totally thinking about the mm, the embodiment issue as
Mm,
well today.
hmm.
That's a very important piece.
Yeah, yeah.
I know Jordan Peterson always said that's a very important piece of AI, that until they understood
Mm,
that it needs to be embodied, that there was much about perception that they weren't able to teach AI.
yes,
But I
right.
think that obviously the embodiment also affects the whole idea of machine learning. And
Hmm.
when we look at the way humans learn,
Hmm.
you can't learn without application, right? You have
That's
to.
right. You need that interface. You need that interaction, and
Mhm.
it's sensation, intuition, all
Yes.
the cognitive functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition
Hmm.
that Jung defined in his work. Um, those are the way we interact with the inner and the outer worlds, and um, that is information, and those can be thought of as information, or as frequencies of um, that have certain vibrational frequencies.
Mm.
I mean, if you look at the brain and
Hmm.
look at an EEG and the pattern of firing of neurons, it is a waveform. Um, and so,
And do
yeah,
those waveforms differ based on whether it's cognition or emotion or?
from what I've studied, just which isn't, anywhere near knowing what I'm talking about,
Mhm. Yeah,
but
I'm in the same boat.
okay, yeah, but that is not going to stop me uh, from talking about it. Yeah, I think there's a guy named Dario Nardi who has done some work in trying to map out the way that different typologies, personality types, which is how you use your cognitive functions,
Hmm.
how they're stacked, from a dominant, like uh, the ones you use dominantly or predominantly, uh, to the ones that you don't use very often, and the way that those line up determine to a large degree your personality. So there's a whole science of personality. This is sort of related to um, the big five traits, but it's a little bit different way of looking at it. That Myers and Briggs sort of came up with it's called the MBTI system,
Hmm.
um, based on cognitive functions and Jung's work. Um, but yeah, I think Dario Nardi has done some work with EEG that shows that he's been able to sort of tease out when you're thinking versus when you're feeling.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm not, there's an introverted and an extroverted um, polarity to each of the cognitive functions. Um, so there's a total of 8 of them. There's 4 introverted and 4 extroverted.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, if you might look that up.
I will. I wrote it down. Yeah, that's really
Mm-hmm.
good.
Yeah, and I think there's other work. There's uh, and maybe there needs to be more work along those lines.
Have you run into Rupert Sheldrake?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I know he's interested in doing a lot of
Hmm.
peripheral investigation.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Well, as far as kind of steering it back to what we were talking about with
Uh-huh.
stochastic resonance, one of the benefits of that, and it is a very practical example of introducing noise or chaos into any system,
Mm-hmm.
is that there is when we get older, we start to lose our balance. We get our cognitive functions, have an aspect that well, I'll back up a little bit. There is a theory that the brain generates its own noise. And that noise, some people theorize that noise is actually a key component of consciousness or of cognition. And one interesting phenomenon that is that when older people start to get older and they lose their ability to have their body in balance, so they're more wobbly. There's been some research done where you can put in the soles of the shoe these pads that generate noise. They're a random pattern of impulses, and the elderly people that are losing their balance, when they wear these soles, they have increased balance, like to the level of a 20-year-old in some
Wow.
cases. There's also some research that's
Now,
being
this is actual noise, or is this a
this is
physical impulse?
physical vibration that isn't
Okay.
a regular sine wave. It's chaotic, it's stochastic noise.
So would the loss of balance be related to the loss of feeling in the feet, so that your feet are no longer as sensitive to the natural noise that you're getting from the ground?
It
Or
may be something to do with like whatever the signal in your brain that is responsible for telling your body where it's located in space and keeping your balance
okay.
isn't very strong. That signal is weak, and so by introducing noise, you're boosting. It's that same aspect of boosting the signal, and now okay, their body can hear.
Hey, I want a pair of those.
Yeah, isn't that good?
Yeah.
It's also being looked at and from what I understand, used successfully to treat symptoms or in Parkinson's disease, where there's a lot of shaking and uncontrollable, shaking, that those symptoms can be reduced by introducing noise, stochastic chaos, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
So I think that there's this balancing aspect. So, when you're talking about art and why did anybody do it? Why did the, first people start making art in the first place? And my own personal thinking on this is that it's a mental hygienic process. It's like dreaming. It's necessary for a balancing of the cognitive functions. And there's this balance that we can easily think of in terms of our physical bodies. But there's also, we know, although we don't really understand, what that may look like when we scan a brain, but we know what we're saying when we say, I feel balanced emotionally, intellectually, all my cognitive functions. I'm in touch with the world. My senses are attuned, and so we know what that means. But even though we don't really understand how it is created in the mind and in the body, so I think that there's something similar to art and dreams that is taking this information. It's taking the noise essentially and making it into order, bringing about order, and that brings about order within ourselves, within our system, our cognitive and cognitive functions.
So that would be true of any creative endeavor.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's, and I think there's a way to look at life that way, to look at your everyday, like right now, experience as sort of this work of art in a way. that
Mm-hmm.
you are perceiving, and things can be looked at in not just a canvas, but
Mm.
just everyday life can be looked at. Every object and every experience and sensation can be interpreted a million different ways, and we're automatically sort of, our minds are doing that for us, at making sense of it.
Sure, our minds are curating every moment for us because
Hmm.
it's curated according to whatever our interest happens to be at the moment. So the things that we
Hmm.
notice are related to our interest or our goals, or right, which
Yes.
becomes the boundary that we put around our system. Otherwise, we get overwhelmed by all the detail. And
Right. Right. Yeah.
so I really like your idea about how they might have started doing art as a way of kind of mental hygiene or
Well, yeah.
restoration.
Well, in the cave, let's just say, we know that the earliest forms of art have been found in caves.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to think about it, it's way back in the cave. There's no natural sunlight, so there's a torch, there's a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've got a flickering flame, and in a cave there's shadows, and on a rock surface that is irregular, there's a lot of like shapes and shadows that are there to for the mind to.
Aha.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
So
see
that's,
that.
maybe that, hey, that, the person didn't have the language to say, you know this, hey, I see the animals that we hunt on the wall. But that's what they were doing, perhaps, is not
Well, and that
seeing it
answers
here and
another
then. Yeah.
that answers another question for me, because I always thought, how, you know, how could they have, back in the cave, they didn't have the model to look at because the animal was out in the field someplace, or out attacking their neighbors or whatever. So they didn't have they didn't have a photograph to work from, and yet they created
Right.
these
Right. Yeah.
beautiful visions of these animals. But I find for myself as well that drawing on a blank sheet of paper, my drawings are very childish and elementary. But if I am looking at some chaos on a canvas and I see a figure in there, the figure that I see is always much closer to reality,
Yeah.
a more beautiful version of reality. And then
Yes.
when I draw that figure out, I get something that's very interesting compared to the elementary thing I might have drawn from a blank sheet of paper. So that
Absolutely.
might very well have been what was happening with the cave people. But I,
Absolutely.
but
Could
I wanted
be.
to add one other thing to that, and that is that looking at it as a uh, personal renewal is, I think, a very valuable aspect of it for me, and I think for other people as well. But I also have come to think over the years that because each of us is so unique in the experiences that we've had in life and the way that we curate reality, and the way that we see the world because of all the books that we've read and the friends that we've had, and I mean, how rich an individual life is, that if each of us doesn't find some way to express that individuality out into the world becomes a much poorer place because of it. And that is why every person should find some vehicle for creativity to be offering. It's a interactive thing, right? You're
Absolutely.
from the chaos, you're bringing in this rejuvenation to your own personal order, but then you're giving back out into the world what you gained from it, and through that we are enhancing the wholeness of the community.
I couldn't agree more. Yes. It seems like, and I know we're not the first people to talk about this, the way to approach art and to approach you know drawing the negative space and that type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing things emerge. But I came across this sort of on my own, and then I looked out there and I saw that, okay, this isn't anything new. People have known about this for a long time, but I didn't this isn't how I was ever taught or introduced to art in
Hmm.
school.
Yep, it's
Or
not how
quite
I
the
was taught
contrary.
either.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I never started painting until I was 50, and
okay.
I
Yeah.
never thought I had any creativity at all until I was about 55. And that's when
Yeah.
I started taking this class on the elements and principles of design. And it
Huh.
sort of rewrote my brain, what I learned in that class. And it's changed the way that I look at the whole world. So,
Yeah. That's great. That's great.
uh,
Do you wish that you would have come across that earlier in your life?
well, but then I wouldn't be the person that I am, you know?
Yeah.
Our journeys are so unique and we go through
Yeah.
so many. What I wish is that my brain had awakened earlier, because
Yeah.
my brain didn't really wake up until about 2 years ago. And ever since then, I have just been on fire trying to learn as much as I can about everything. But before that, I
Yeah.
was perfectly happy to puddle along and read the same books that I'd read over and over and over again many times, and binge watch Netflix series, and
Yeah.
wasted a lot of years. So,
Was there something that happened 2 years ago that woke your brain up
oh, that's a good question.
in particular? An event or
Well, I have an older daughter who challenged me to watch some videos on addictive eating by a woman by the name of Susan Pierce Thompson.
okay.
And she was relating how the way that we eat can affect our brain chemistry.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, I could see myself in the years that I had been less than disciplined about the way that I ate and had kind of fallen over into, indiscriminate snacking and eating sugar. And I knew those things were very damaging to me and damaging to my brain and damaging to my outlook on life, but I couldn't seem to let it go. But I watched these videos and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm just like those rats that she's talking about. I don't want to be a rat. and and so I started doing her program, which was basically a Food Addicts Anonymous eating
Okay.
program.
Mhm.
And the idea is that you're kind of doing intermittent fasting. You have at least 13 hours between your evening meal and your morning meal, and then you don't eat sugar, you don't eat flour, and fairly simple thing. You can eat a lot of protein and vegetables and fruit and so forth. But
Mhm.
so over the course of a year and a half, I lost 85 pounds and rewrote my brain. And I also stopped painting altogether because I sort of was at peace for the first time in many years. And I realized that a lot of my painting had been trying to work out where that anxiety was coming from. And I no longer had the anxiety because life was good. I was peaceful. I wasn't addicted anymore. And so I didn't have any direction. So I thought, I don't know if I'm supposed to just stop painting or
Yeah.
if um, I should try it one more time. So I went back one more time and took the class again this spring, the
Okay.
creativity class.
Yeah.
And I produced 20 paintings of cello players. So if you look at my
I,
website,
I
you'll
did
see some
that.
of them.
I really like those. Yeah, the cello players.
And I realized, okay, that impulse is still there. But along with it now is this impulse that I started on a couple of years ago with reading Jordan Peterson, watching his videos,
Hmm.
led me into following a lot of other people who are onto interesting things. And so
Hmm.
woke up my brain and the academic interest and my interest in trying to understand these fundamental truths that guide the world and how they show up in every domain of knowledge and how they're transferable from one domain to another, and
Hmm.
how even the lesson that a child can learn making mud pies can be transferable over into the economic sphere. So that says to me that there is some beautiful design and order in the universe, and I want other people to see that
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
beauty that I see.
Absolutely. It's beauty, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
that's what it's about. So did you change the way you approached painting 2 years ago? was there a way that you painted and thought about the process or did the process before you had this awakening? And then
Wow.
after?
That's a good question. I can't say that I changed the process so much, but there was a change in my maybe the process was the same, but each moment of the process was different.
Okay.
Maybe I do the same thing where I create the chaos on the canvas, but then when I start painting, there's a different part of me that's looking for the story. There's a different part of me that's looking for the music or the beauty than was there before. It's a much more peaceful process to me now than it used to be.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't understand. I can't really articulate what the difference is, but I'll give it some thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't feel as driven to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, when I had the class and I had to produce 2 big paintings every week, obviously I had to hustle, and get them done.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, and I'm not having to hustle right now. I do have some commissions on the back burner that I need to get started on, but
Yeah.
I think I approach the creative process a little differently to
Mm-hmm.
what I want to say, and maybe the sense of peace that's underneath it all rather than the anxiety.
I see. Yeah. So it sounds like maybe before you had a lot of more anxiety, and there was maybe something that you were trying to fill or fulfill or appease or something with your work, and
Yes.
then
Uh-huh.
at at some point, suddenly or over some period of time, something else came into that and filled that void within you, so that the painting wasn't that thing that you were
Hmm.
looking to put into that hole, into that void, and fulfill it.
Yeah,
So
that's an interesting way to look at it. So I've been a follower of Jesus Christ since
mm,
1980,
okay.
and obviously during that time, I've had times when I was more avid, and times when I was more drifting, and times when I had
Mm,
doubts, and times when I've been very, very interested, very faithful follower. So I mean, I've had a life experience like anybody else's life experience.
mhm,
But I would say that during those years, probably the last 15 years, especially when I struggled a lot with the food issue,
mhm,
that my faith was very real to me. So it wasn't like I was trying to fill a hole that was left by not having God with me. But um, I definitely, in my personal relationships, I would say maybe I didn't feel. Uh, I had a lot of struggle with feeling worthy of love, or feeling that there was any meaning in my life purpose
mhm,
outside of my art. It
mhm,
seemed like my art gave me a role to play, and that if even though I might feel that people couldn't see any value to me in other ways, they would see value to me in my art.
yes.
And so it wasn't, I knew that I had infinite value in God's eyes, because I know that He sees me through the cross of Christ. And so
Mhm,
there's an infinite value there. But I didn't feel that I had that value to other people.
yeah.
And I don't think that that was based on reality. That was just my perception of how things looked, because I was
Mhm,
trapped inside this addiction.
mhm,
And the addiction made me feel flawed, and it wasn't even so much the appearance. obviously my appearance was flawed because of the extra weight, but it was more how I felt flawed because I couldn't control that aspect of my life. I was trying to be my own control over that. And I think addiction is this weird thing. It's a very weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we can get addicted to anything, but
Yeah.
anytime one of those addictions gets control of you, you feel helpless.
Yes.
Even though I knew that in Christ, he was everything. I was not helpless. I always had him. I
Yeah.
still couldn't seem to give that to him. It was kind of like Augustine always said, Lord, save me from my lust, but not quite yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me keep a little bit of that.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
and yet there was a part of me that felt really filled with anxiety over even recognizing that aspect of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And once the addiction was more or less gone, then that thing was just no longer important anymore. So
Yeah.
I don't know,
That's
it's hard to put into words, but
yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, um, so if I could ask, was there you mentioned you watch these videos and that sort of puts you on this path towards healthy eating,
mm-hmm.
and you cut out a lot of the sugar and the flour and things like that and
Yeah.
started to feel better and think better.
Mm-hmm.
What was that it? I mean, do you feel like there was that was the catalyst, sort of a biological chemical catalyst that then led to this your ability to sort of open this other part of yourself up and give that away to Christ as well? Or was, did something else happen? Was there or was it just sort of the time? It was the time that was going to happen.
Hmm. Well, there were other things going on in our lives. In the background of all that, there was a extremely traumatic situation that was happening,
Mm-hmm.
and which I don't want to go into, but
Yeah, sure.
but certainly gave me a great appreciation of not being burdened with that when I had this other thing to be. I wanted to be in a place where I could really give that to the Lord and walk through that with Him and not be all tangled up in my own garbage, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, yes, the chemical change took place almost immediately within like the first week or two of getting off of sugar and flour. I immediately felt more freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But any of those things playing out over time, the desires will creep back in. And so to get to a place where you can allow the Holy Spirit to govern those impulses,
Mm-hmm.
it's a long learning process. It's not an overnight thing.
Yeah.
And that long learning process also has a great enriching and deepening aspect,
Mm-hmm.
I would say. And then about midway through that, I started, I hadn't been in Bible study for several years, and I started a Bible study on the book of Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of the Precept organization. I don't know if you've ever studied the Bible with Precept, but it's
No.
it's very much inductive, really exploring word by word, phrase by phrase, really trying to see what the Bible is saying. And the book of Hebrews was so incredibly rich that I felt like by the time I got through it, that if I was ever off on a desert island and I could only choose one book of the Bible, the book of Hebrews would be enough, because there's just enough there. And that also enriched my view of the world. It gave me this, I've been trying to put this into words in the last few days, but it's
Mm-hmm.
this kind of picture of, we were talking about how a word only has as much meaning as the receiver is prepared to understand.
Yes.
I think in the same way that God's word, when it was first given to us,
Yes.
was complete in everything that we will ever need to understand it, but we will only understand it as we grow in our capacity to understand it. And so what we know now about physics completely changes the meaning of some of the things that are, no, doesn't change the meaning, completely enhances the meaning of some of the things that
Yeah.
are in the scripture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the last few days, I've been looking at the book of John and John chapter 1,
Mm-hmm.
and I read the Bible differently now because of Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Because when he teaches the Bible, he says, well, now, why did it say this instead of that? So now when I start reading, I'll be, when that says is that really is? And then I'll go back and I look in the Greek interlinear. Are you still there, Alex?
Yeah, I'm back.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay. I look at the Greek interlinear translation on Bible Hub, and I start looking at it word by word. And the first chapter of John is a physics textbook. It is mind-blowing. I mean, there's quantum physics all through there,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I never would have seen before I knew anything about quantum
Right.
physics. And right now, I only know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
But I think the whole word is like that. There's a riches there that we have no idea about because we are still stumbling around in the darkness. But as we grow in our capacity to understand the universe, I think it will unfold for us more and more.
Yes. Well, there's something that, Joseph Campbell, if you've ever studied.
Yeah, we had to read Joseph Campbell when I was in college. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I haven't read it since.
Well, something that you're saying sort of brings that up for me because he's talking, the power of myth and that in this sort of post-enlightenment or post-modernity now, but we got to a place where, the myths didn't hold any meaning for us, any substance, because we knew better. We know the sun and the physics and all that kind of stuff. And it just got to the point to where the materialist view of things and the Cartesian view of the world came to just sort of obliterate, our connection to the mystical or the unknown, the mystery.
Right.
And yeah. And I think that there's a way that physics is now moving into this realm back into the, with entanglement and action at a distance and all this kind of stuff that and non-locality and many of the different concepts are just if you can understand it at least to the level that you can realize how strange it is, I think it can renew that sense of mystery and awe, and that can really put a person in touch with that, hey, that there's something here that's not just the materialistic world that we see. There's something underneath that, and it isn't surprising that the Bible would describe that reality because it's the same reality.
Yeah.
That they're always having. That's
Uh-huh.
it's not a new reality, it's just a new language to
Right.
understand that. There was a quote by Rumi that stood out to me, and if I can find it really quick, this brings it up. Okay, he says, new organs of perception come into being as a result of necessity. Therefore, O man, increase your necessity so that you may increase your perception.
Anomaly. See, that's anomaly all over. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, it is.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So very briefly, I just want to bring it back around before we close off because we've been about an hour and 10 minutes now, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
you were just talking about all these different aspects of quantum physics, and I was thinking back to your very early discussion about doodling, and how you, when you start to observe things arising, and how you have to be careful not to overthink it at that moment, and that's where you can stay in this flow state.
Yes.
And that made me think about quantum physics and how the thing changes when you observe it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it concretizes. The waveform collapses, and the thing becomes where it is. Up until that point, it isn't anywhere. It doesn't exist, or it's all the all potential.
Yeah.
You know, that's something else that maybe if we talk again, we can, you know, sort of continue on that vein.
Well, let's get it on the calendar, Alex. And I'm going to send this to you, and you can look it over and see if you feel comfortable with releasing it out into the cyber sphere. And if so, I think it would be a lot of fun for people. We covered the gamut today.
Yeah, we did. Well, it was fun for me.
It was fun for me too. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.